Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Very straightforward topic today. Let's get it. People who have sleep paralysis demons. What's that like? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I've had sleep paralysis like twice. I never had any visual hallucinations though, just auditory hallucinations. Both times it was the deafening sound of television or radio static. One of the times freaked me out because I had my radio on, so I thought that something was messing with it. Tried to get up to see what was going on with it and realized I couldn't move. Luckily, I was familiar with sleep paralysis and was able to wake myself up. Usually, whenever I have them, they appear in the corner of my room. They're tall and impossibly thin, with large and long hands, all pitch shadows with red circles where eyes should be. They sort of resemble people. They usually just come up and sit on the edge of my bed and pat my knee gently as if to comfort me. They aren't mean or anything. They go between looking at me and just looking at things around my room, reading posters, etc. Eventually, they sort of just dissolve into thin air, and then they're gone. It's a weird experience, but I'm glad it's not deeply horrifying. My first time, it was a figure in a motorcycle helmet standing in the doorway of my room. My first time living away from home on my own. It feels like your mouth is sewn shut, and your tongue isn't there anyway, even if you wanted to scream, and your body is stapled you to the bed, or in some thick substance that doesn't let you move. I get it less and less often as I get older. Think messing around with drugs caused it. And now, when I get it, I can alter my breathing enough my boyfriend wakes up and can then wake me up. It's bloody horrible though. I've a strange demon. He is old, like 50, thanks. Is bald, somewhat, and has a very satanic face with a beard. He grabs me from my back and squeezes me too much that I scream and scream until my mom or brother comes to my room to wake me up. This doesn't happen when I'm sleeping straight or on the left side, but happens when I'm sleeping on the right. That means even without any weight on my body, I feel him. It's been 4 months since I last saw him. I am poor at drawing, but I've seen him so much that I can describe his facial features. I used to have them when I was younger. I would always wake up and three blobbish black masses would be at the foot of my bed. No faces, but blackened more so than their bodies and sunken in where their face should have been. No sharp lines or distinct figures. Just three separate blobs, floor to about 5 or 6 feet long. Couldn't move. Felt like I couldn't breathe, and I would just have to lay there until they dissipated. They weren't violent, but felt malevolent. Felt like hours until they left, but I had no sense of how much time would pass. I would like to note that my mother made me collect dolls growing up and would put them in my room. I wholeheartedly believed those kept the dead inside, but that's my opinion.
That's an interesting take on dolls. I mean, some of them can be creepy just because of the look, but I wonder how much of that is societal. Maybe 200 years ago, people thought, porcelain dolls were the prettiest thing on the block.
Through college, and few years after, I had sleep paralysis fairly often. It was never the same hallucination. The first experience was Samara from The Ring, hanging over me and dripping water onto me. Woke up drenched in sweat. I've also just seen the shadows of people on the wall while they spoke nonsense from the foot of my bed, seemingly with all intent, but I couldn't understand them. Most of the time, it was too dark for me to see, so it would just be me, the feeling of something pressing down on me, forcing me into the mattress, and usually accompanied by exaggerated house sounds or the sounds of nature outside of my window was open. Infrequent but unpleasant. As a child, 2 to 4 years old, I knew my Victorian bed was haunted. Every night a group of gnomes would sit on the end of it, pulling faces at me, laughing, making rude gestures, while I was frozen, unable to call for help or even hide under the covers. Oddly, my little sister wound up with that bed and tells me she had nightmares that exactly matched the ringleader of my nightly visitors. I assume I must have told her about them, but neither of us remember talking about it. As an adult, It's altogether more threatening, but much less frequent. I have two visitors, never on the same nights. The less threatening is a gray humanoid demon with smooth skin, red pink gums, long claws, and large muscles. He sinks his claws into my leg and tries to pull me from the bed. I can't move, and it only goes when I manage to scream, and my husband wakes me up. Sometimes those can last for what feels like hours. Worse is my Hat Man. Hat Man doesn't cause me physical pain, but he stands next to the bed or in the corner of the room while I'm suffocating and paralyzed. When I get this one, thankfully rarely, there's an intense visceral sense of mindless terror. It sinks into me and causes anxiety for days afterwards. In the light of day, I am not afraid of any of these things. Arachnophobia crew here, but I can't convey the fear they inspire where I'm helpless. I used to have sleep paralysis all the time while I was in my first couple years of college. I never saw demons, just a lot of shadow people lurking in corners. I couldn't see clearly. Demons probably would have been way more interesting. Sleep paralysis is some whack stuff. I have dreams all the time where it's a constant cycle of me realizing it's a dream and trying to wake up, but not being able to. Sleep paralysis is on a whole other level. You're just kind of stuck there hoping you wake up. I stopped getting sleep paralysis around the time my grandfather passed on and started showing up in my dreams to watch over me. I'd never put two and two together until now, but yeah, glad he was looking out for me. I fairly regularly have sleep paralysis. What you need to do is keep your eyes closed. If you try and open your eyes, that's when the hallucinations set in. Keep your eyes firmly closed and try to wriggle your big toes. That usually breaks you out of it. I grew up very Christian. When I was 12, I told my folks that a lady with wild fire-like hair, pink eyes, and long hands held me down in my sleep. They obviously freaked out. My pastor told me that it was the devil trying to possess me. For the next 10-ish years, I slept with a tiny Bible clutched in my hands, and when she would come visit, I would repeat the Lord's Prayer over and over again until I woke up. At 22, I took a course on abnormal psychology, and it touched on sleep demons in association with sleep paralysis. I learned it was a sleep disorder and understood the implications of why a demon manifests itself. Understanding that, I rarely see the demon I named Agatha. Usually, when I go through a sleep paralysis event, I slow my breathing, stay calm, and wait for it to pass. However, during times of high stress, she sometimes returns. Even though I've considered myself an agnostic humanist for many, many years, old habits return, and I recite the Lord's Prayer until she leaves.
I'm sure there are worse habits to take from childhood than repeating the Lord's Prayer in times of strife, but, if it works, it works.
Mine generally only happens if I take a nap during the day, so I very rarely take naps because it happens almost every time. It's usually the feeling that someone is breaking into my home or is walking around my room, but I can't really see them. It's more like a feeling, a very dark feeling, because I can't move and don't know what is happening or what's fixing to happen, but it feels ominous. Basically, like I'm a helpless thing at the whim of whoever or whatever is in my room. It sucks. I've only had sleep paralysis once, but it was the most terrifying moment of my life. I don't think the demon was for me though, but it was there. It was a very rough time for my family. My sister Amy had been missing for at least a year, and we all feared the worst, but still had hope she would be found. I had just sold all of my possessions and moved back in with my father, who normally remodels houses, but was laid up after a kickboxing injury. My father, sister, and I are all bipolar of varying severity. He was very depressed, as I was. I awoke late at night in a dark room, and I was unable to move. There seemed to be a darkness swirling around, almost like tentacles of pure black smoke pointed toward my father's room. The feeling of panic was overwhelming. I couldn't move, and I couldn't breathe. From above, there was a shining bright light that came down and calmed me. It was Amy. She told me that she was dead, and she was no longer suffering. She was okay, but she was worried about my father. She thought he was going to hurt himself. All of a sudden, I could move again, and I screamed from my soul. The darkness faded, and I went to my dad's room and asked him if he was okay, and told him that I loved him, and that I saw my sister in a dream, and she wanted him to be okay and loved him. He didn't know what I was talking about, and went back to sleep. I don't know if I saw my sister that night. I don't know if there was something else there, feeding from our misery. I never felt that level of dread and panic again, or woken up unable to move. I started grieving for my sister that night. I knew in my heart she was dead and no longer suffering. They found her body years later in a fairly deep grave. Some kids were out by the river and found a bone. The police say that outside of some miraculous jailhouse confession, they will never know what really happened, but they do think she was murdered. I used to have sleep paralysis once. It wasn't demons. I woke up from a nightmare laying on the bed next to me, sleeping body, and I could not breathe, not move a bit, and desperately trying to recall that spell to get back to my body. And when I did, I've merged to my body. Ability to breathe and move returned to me, but since then, I can't remember the spell, then what that nightmare was about. Pretty scary experience, I must admit. I used to all the time when I was younger. I wouldn't call them demons. Also, it isn't exactly like a completely detailed hallucination either. Mine were always audible hallucinations and sometimes visual as well. I would have a figure at the edge of my bed sometimes. One time in particular, I remember this figure at the edge of my bed in a sitting position, mumbling something I couldn't understand. For some reason, it wasn't that scary to me. My twin died in the womb, so I always thought maybe it was just my twin visiting me. Terrifying and hopeless. It's usually something different, but you always know it's there for me. I always feel like I'm straining with all I've got to scream or thrash around, but of course I can't. That's what really scares me. Not the demon or figure or whatever, the losing control of myself. I've seemed to notice that this will almost definitely happen if I fall asleep on my back, so I make an effort to sleep on my side, always. I've only had it a handful of times in my life. I never had the typical paralysis that comes with it generally, but I had the hallucinations. One time I woke up and there were fish flopping all around my room on me, on the walls, on the ceiling, just a swarm of flopping fish. I remember walking out of my room and looking back in to see if they were still there, and they were. No fish in the hallway or in the rest of the house, but my bedroom was flooded with fish. Of course, when I got my mom to make her come look, they were gone. Another time, it was a little boy standing by my side of the bed and jovially insulting me. I remember it being actually kind of funny, but I can't remember what he said. Just really strange experiences. I only experienced this at my father's apartment. It's like hell. I swear that place is haunted. The last time I slept there alone, I left all the lights in the bedroom and TV on. Woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't for the life of me, barely breathing. And it felt like someone or something really dark laying right next to me in the bed. It felt like a super dark presence, and I felt it touch me with claw-like hands. Needless to say, I never stay there at night alone. That place is haunted, and no one can convince me it's not. I've had chronic sleep paralysis for 7 years. They're very seldom the same more than twice, but one demon I saw is a methed-out older lady with long, straggly hair cradling a baby. She stared at me with pure hatred. Another was a demon that basically kidnapped my soul into a black hole, and while I was standing in his void, he was telepathically showing me what he looked like. He was a gigantic black creature with blade-like metallic scales that protruded off his body. When he knew I could mentally see him, he started drooling and urinating. Another demon I saw took the form of my cousin's wife. There were 3 of her, but their heads were stuffed potato sacks with her facial features painted on them. Those were the more creepy figures I saw that stood out. Not all sleep paralysis is bad though. There have been quite a few times where I could feel my body going into the vibration stage of sleep paralysis, and instead of getting scared, I became aroused and would invite the demons to take me sexually. Definitely my most erotic sexual experience. I could feel everything that was happening to me, and the demon knew exactly how to please me.
So, do you not want your sleep demons to visit you, or do you want them to visit you? That was a mixed bag right there. Erotic.
It's terrifying. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night. You open your eyes and see this thick black cloud hovering in the corner of your room by the ceiling. Not just any cloud, mind you. It's in super high definition, more real than reality. It's surreal. You're terrified. You try to scream. You muster all of your strength just to mutter the tiniest little whisper, not even close to being loud enough to wake anybody else up. You try to sit up and run, only to realize you can't move. Everything is more vivid than it has ever been before. You think you're not just going to be torn to pieces, but have a 4K UHD view of it while it happens. Then your brain figures it out, and like being anesthetized before surgery, you drift back to sleep. They're normally just the shadow people I see all the time, but since I can't move, they allow me to stare at them longer, all black, faceless humanoids. I used to have a problem with my Reaper, but I figured out how to avoid him. For about a year, when I've had sleep paralysis, he'd stand right next to my bed, stereotypical hooded black cloak, a face that looks like a mashup of the Scream mask and a real corpse. The only demon I've had actually move was Sarah Silverman. I thought it was my roommate, but as she got closer, I realized it wasn't. Then she climbed on my bed and sat on my back. We're cool though. Sarah Silverman is my favorite sleep paralysis demon. Terrifying. You wake up and you can't move a single muscle, but out of the corner of your eye you see a figure. For me, it looks like an extremely exaggerated stereotypical witch. Think of the witch from Sleeping Beauty, except the features are even more long and thin and exaggerated. All the while, it's doing the Mr. Burns excellent thing with its spindly fingers and just smiling at me. It's a struggle to close your eyes, except when you blink, so all you can do is lay there and stare out as it stares back. And as the paralysis fades, it starts to back away, so it stays on the edge of my vision, even if that means it starts phasing through the wall. I awoke to my laptop screen illuminating the bedroom of the basement apartment where I was living alone. In the corner of the room was an old hag completely in shadows with no discernible features. From there, she released a swarm of bats that circled the ceiling. I tried to scream, and of course, nothing but squeaks came out of my mouth. Then, I felt a gentle shake and a whisper of my name, telling me to wake up. The voice belonged to my friend who was moving in the following week, but definitely wasn't in the apartment with me at this point. I eventually woke up for real to a pitch black room, my laptop closed, and no witch or bats or friends anywhere to be found. I was terrified. I turned on every light and waited until my heart rate settled down again. One other particularly memorable experience, I felt a low rumbling, and then an entire pack of wolves rushed over top of my bed. Completely bizarre, but felt so real at the time. I've had sleep paralysis with auditory hallucinations that were weird, but far less scary than the first two as well.